Okay, guys, we are starting a new study tonight. This will not be a long study, probably about 5 weeks long. And it's a topic actually that Allie suggested to me because I was talking to her about, I don't know what study we're going to do next. We finished that short 3-week study on worship. And so we're going to do a study on our understanding, sort of a biblical theology of technology. How are we supposed to understand technology? How do we interact with it? What are some of the opportunities provided by it? What are some of the dangers and pitfalls that come along with it? And so that's what we're going to do, all right? Now, the first thing I want to do tonight, though, is give you a definition of technology, and then I'm going to have you discuss some things about technology at your tables, all right? So just in terms of technology, under Roman numeral 1, what is technology? Now, most of the time when we think of technology, we think about things like electronics, right? Our phones, our computers, those types of things. And that is technology. And in fact, this study is going to focus mainly upon that form of technology. But technology is much broader than that. We could say that technology is the application of knowledge and skills to a practical end or practical goal. So technology is the application of knowledge and skills toward a practical end, practical goal. The word technology actually comes from 2 Greek words, one referring to skill, art, or craft, and then of course the second half of it, logos, referring to word, or typically we use it when we talk about the study of something. So biology, the study of life. Technology, though, is not the study of art or the study of skill, but it is the application of skill. That's the way that we use it in modern language. And so we're going to think about how we go about applying knowledge and skills toward a practical end. In that way, it is actually distinct from art itself. Art does not necessarily have to have a practical end. The aim of art can simply be the enjoyment of the art itself, right? It doesn't have to accomplish anything beyond that enjoyment in the world. Art may involve lots of forms of technology, or a particular piece of technology may also be considered an artwork, but they are not the same thing. It's very important to know that technology, or at least technology as we're thinking of it, always has some practical, real-world application in mind. Always. There's a goal to implement whatever you're doing or making in real life in all sorts of various ways. So with that kind of very broad definition of technology in mind, it's more than just our electronics. It's anything that we build or make or conceive of using knowledge and skills that has a practical purpose behind it, practical end. 2 questions I want you to discuss at your tables, okay? First off, what do you think, if you look back over the last, we're going to limit ourselves to 1,000 years, to the last 1,000 years. See if you can come up with what you think are the 3 most significant forms of technology that were developed. So you could say the most important inventions, right? In the last 1,000 years. So don't say the wheel, it's older than 1,000 years, okay? But think in terms of what are the most significant, the most impactful forms of technology that have been conceived of, invented in the last 1,000 years, all right? That'll get us thinking broadly in terms of what technology is. And then the second question is, what do you think is 2 parts? 1, what is the greatest danger of technology? And then 2, what is the greatest benefit that can be derived from technology, okay? But greatest danger, greatest benefit, or you could say the greatest evil that can be brought about by technology, and also the greatest good that might be brought about by technology, okay? So first, think in terms of what it is by coming up with some ideas of looking back over the last 1,000 years, and then think in terms of good and bad technology, all right? And just kind of discuss that at your tables, and then I want to go around after about 3 or 4 minutes and see what things you've come up with, all right? So you guys go ahead and discuss. And then once we're done having that discussion, then we're going to narrowly focus in on creation and technology, the fall in technology, and then the Christian life and technology. The rest of your crew is in the other room, if y'all are wondering where the other teenagers are. Y'all start Ephesians tonight. I messed everything up by bringing them in here for 3 weeks. They don't know what to do or where to go. It's very confusing. I actually like having them in here. So, all right, you guys discuss. You're supposed to be talking right now. Yeah. All right, you guys, let me hear some of your thoughts on the most significant technological developments in the last 1,000 years. What are some things that y'all came up with? Just the use of electricity. Yeah, massive. Space travel, okay, all right. The printing press, yeah, very important. Yeah, nice. Anybody else? Any other suggestions? The internet, yeah. The ballpoint pen, very practical coming from Colt. I'm shocked by that. Yeah, I know, that's good. No, but we don't have to dip our pens in ink all the time. We're not using feathers and other things, yeah. The combustion engine, very good, nice, very good. All right. Any other thoughts? All right, anybody think you got something? Vaccines, yeah, okay. All right, medical technology, right, yeah, okay. Good deal. All right. Yeah, there's so many things that we could name, but all of those things have had a massive, and most of us would say, for the things that we're naming them because we would think, well, they've had a net positive impact upon human development and culture and those sorts of things. Obviously, we could come up with some negatives for some of them, but we wouldn't name them as significant and important if they didn't have net positive results and outcomes in the end. So as you think about that, the nature of technology, what are some of the greatest goods and greatest evils that might come out of, or that have come out of, various forms of technology? What can you think of? Good things, yeah. Good and evil. on both sides of the equation. Okay, in terms of good and evil, what sorts of outcomes? Okay, yeah. Providing access to things that we shouldn't have access to, that are not good for us. Yeah. Yeah, internet, all that's been used for some pretty bad things. Yeah. Colt? Firearms, yeah. Both, yeah. I mean, they've revolutionized warfare and personal defense, but also in some ways, they've made mass killings much simpler, much easier. Yeah. So, yeah. Good and bad for the same technology. A lot of times it has to do with how we implement it. If you think back in the ancient world, and I know I said the last 1,000 years, I'm going to go back a little bit further than that. If you think back to the ancient world, the Romans were remarkable in their ingenuity, and the road system that they built was unparalleled, not just for its time, but even to today. Their roads remain the most durable roads ever built. That's why you can go to places all over Europe and still see Roman roads, quite literally, still there. And those roads made travel much more efficient and effective. That's why the Apostle Paul was able to travel to all the places he traveled. He was able to travel along those Roman roads, which were also, by the way, protected by Roman soldiers at key points. It was still a dangerous thing to do, to go on a long journey, and there were still bad people along the roads. But the invention of those particular roads, their durability, the ability to take a cart down those roads and travel across terrain that you couldn't get across before with any sort of ease, changed the world and made it possible for the gospel to spread much more rapidly than it could have in any era before that. And that's just a technology developed by a pagan nation that God used to spread his word far and wide. And there are lots of things like that. There are lots of gospel goods that have come out of technologies that were never designed to advance the gospel, but that God has used throughout history. So we could probably think of lots of those. I mean, just transportation in general, never mind the Roman roads, but the automobile, the airplane, those have been used in massive ways to spread the gospel. Colt mentioned the printing press earlier. The printing press was used to spread copies of Scripture, Martin Luther's 95 Theses, which turned the world upside down. So many things that were only available in handwritten copies for elites that could afford them, or in church libraries were now available, could be mass-produced and provided to the public. It increased literacy, many times over because people had access to printed things. So many things that God has used, technologies that were invented oftentimes for other purposes, God has used to advance the gospel. And so we can think in terms of, when we say what goods have been brought out of some of these things, a lot of times we can focus upon gospel advancement. What things has God used? What new inventions, what sorts of technologies has God used to advance the gospel over the years? And virtually every form of transportation that you can think of, every form of communication that you might think of has been used by the Lord to send the gospel all over the world. And so oftentimes we will have kind of a negative attitude toward technology in general. And I don't want us to approach this study with a negative attitude. I want us to be very aware of the dangers and the pitfalls of technology, particularly of some of the sins that technology might give us more ready access to. But I also want us to be able to think about and pursue the gospel goods that can be aimed at and achieved through the use of all sorts of forms of technology. So we're going to be aware of, and we're going to talk about and think about how to avoid some of the evils that can spread due to technology, but we're also going to talk about the good things that you can do with technology. So we're gonna begin where every good biblical theology concerning any issue should begin, and that's Genesis chapter 1. All right? So if you have a Bible, and you do because I put it on the tables, everybody's got one, okay? Open up to Genesis chapter 1. When we think about technology as the application of knowledge and skills toward a practical end, there is no, I think, clearer place where we are commanded to pursue the use of technology than in the creation mandate in Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1, beginning in verse 26, we read this. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." So I want you to notice how things are worded in verse 28. You have two commands, be fruitful and multiply, followed by a third command, which sort of gives you the goal of those first two. To be fruitful and to multiply, the goal is to fill the earth. And then you have another goal to subdue it, and then the means by which it will be subdued, by having dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So God not only gives to mankind the right to rule over the world, he commands mankind to fill the earth and actually subdue the earth. This automatically requires the use of knowledge and skills aimed at the practical end of subduing the earth. That's the goal. The real goal here in Genesis 1 and 2 ultimately is that mankind would reflect the glory of God toward the rest of creation by, in a sense, spreading out the borders of the garden to fill the entire earth. So the Garden of Eden is described in much the same way as the tabernacle later on in the Torah. That the Garden of Eden is kind of like a temple or a tabernacle in which God's people were to worship, but the goal was not just to stay there in that one location in the garden and worship, but it was to spread the glory of God over the earth by filling the earth, multiplying and filling the earth, and by subduing it, exercising dominion over the earth. And that requires the use of knowledge and skills toward a number of practical ends. Just the act of cultivating a garden requires the use of tools, knowledge, and skills with the goal of producing fruit. And that's the work that Adam was given to do in the garden, and presumably that's the work that he would carry out as his descendants spread out across the earth. So that the creation mandate itself requires the use of technology, requires innovation. And that makes sense because in the context of Genesis chapter 1, you get this detailed account across the first 6 days of creation of God creating things, of him making things and then shaping and forming things, always toward a particular end or purpose. And then he makes us in our image. And while we are not capable of creating something from nothing the way that God does, we are not capable of creating things merely by speaking them into existence. We do image God, though, by forming and shaping the things in the world around us in a creative way. We image God and we shine forth the glory of God by doing something that the rest of creation cannot do. So the creation mandate itself requires and encourages the use of technology and the development of technology. And so we need to begin there, and that's why we begin by saying that technology is not in and of itself sinful or bad. Now, it's easy to understand why someone might conclude that technology is bad by reading the biblical story, because after all, where do we find the corruption of humanity early in the pages of Genesis? Well, with the building of the Tower of Babel, right? And that's a work of technology. It's a work of city building. Indeed, the first cities are, built by those who are rebellious. And so it would be easy to conclude by reading the first several chapters of Genesis and focusing in upon those sin narratives, or focusing in upon the accomplishments of sort of the seed of the serpent, that line of descendants from Adam that are distinct from the godly line, and to see their accomplishments. They're described as accomplishing a number of great things and developing various technologies, and that sort of culminates in the Tower of Babel and the application of all the knowledge and skill that humanity had achieved up to that point toward making a name for themselves. And so it would be easy if you jumped into the story at Genesis 3 or Genesis 4 or even Genesis 5, it would be easy to conclude from that that man's use of technology is a sinful pursuit of his own glory. But if we start with Genesis 1, we recognize that the sinful use of man's ability to create, man's ability to shape and form the creation around him and develop new technologies, the sinful use of that is not the only kind of use available. That we were intended from the very beginning to exercise dominion over the earth, and that would require creativity, that would require shaping and forming the world, it would require the development of a lot of technology. Now, the fall has impacted not just our ability to use our skills in bad ways, but the fall has also impacted or made more difficult the positive use of technology. That's one of the things that we've got to reckon with, and one of the reasons why we struggle sometimes to figure out how to think about particularly newer technologies. We struggle with how to think about those, is because the fall has not just corrupted our own hearts so that we have a tendency to use technology to further sinful ends and goals, but also the fall has affected the creation itself such that our development of technology, or another way to say that, our exercising dominion over the earth, the work of subduing the world, has actually become much more difficult. Much more. You see that in Genesis 3, and then you also see it reflected in Genesis 9 after the flood, when the creation mandate is passed on beyond the flood to Noah and his descendants. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Turn a page over to Genesis chapter 3, and you probably know where I'm going with this. But after the fall, God comes to Adam in verse 17 and says, "Because you listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you shall not eat of it, cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return." The primary vocation of Adam has not changed because of the fall. He was a gardener beforehand, and he's still a gardener. But now his work is made much more difficult because of the fall. It will go forth in pain because the ground itself is cursed and no longer cooperates in the way that it would have. He'll work by the sweat of his face, and it'll last for his entire lifetime until finally, in exhaustion, he collapses to the ground and returns to the dust. So the work of subduing the world has been made much more difficult by the fall. That means that much of the technology that we have developed throughout human history and that we continue to develop, much of the technology that we pursue is actually in pursuit of overcoming and fighting back against the effects of the fall. So Chris mentioned vaccines earlier, right? All of medical technology is our use, our application of knowledge and skills toward the practical end of pushing back upon the physical effects of the fall upon our bodies. Is it not? That's what medical technology is all about. We know that we will still eventually return to the dust. We will all still eventually die. But we're trying to reduce the pain and the toil that we experience in this life because of the fall. And we're also trying as best we can to extend our lives and to push off that return to the dust for as long as we are able to. And we have developed incredible technologies in the pursuit of pushing back upon the effects of the fall upon us and upon the world around us. That's not just true of medical technology, that's true of most of our technologies. Most of the technological advancements that we achieve would not have been achieved apart from our fight against the effects of the fall. Which is not to say that we would not have had great technological achievements, but they would have been arrived at through other means. We would not have been fighting back against sickness and disease. We would not have been trying to push off death. We would not have been fighting against the ground, the natural world as it opposes us. Sure, we probably would have continued and developed great technologies, maybe greater technologies than we have, but it would have been motivated by something else. Not motivated by a desire to overcome the fallen, sinful, broken world in which we live. So, the creation mandate tells us you've got to innovate. You've got to come up with ways to subdue the earth. The fall says that's going to be a lot harder, and so now your innovation is going to have to take the form of fighting against things. Now, I said earlier, though, that if you skip over these early chapters of Genesis, you could very easily conclude that technology is bad because our pursuit of technology is not just hindered by the effects of the fall upon the world around us, but it's hindered by the effects of the fall within us. Right? Our own sinful nature causes us to use and abuse everything that God has given us as a good gift. Every good gift that we have can be either turned into an idol or used in the pursuit of idolatry. That's exactly what happens at the Tower of Babel. So the Tower of Babel serves for us in the early chapters of Genesis as a powerful warning against the wrongful use of technology or the wrongful application of knowledge and skills toward a practical end. So let's take a look at it real quickly so that we can be reminded of exactly what went wrong with this very early and, I think, very advanced form of technology. They're building this tower, which is more like a pyramid. It's a type of pyramid, actually. They're building this tower in Babel, and their whole purpose in building it is to elevate themselves to the place of God. Chapter 11, verse 1. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." Now that's advanced technology. That the understanding that in order to make bricks that are strong enough to bear a heavy load, you have to apply heat to them. That's advanced technology. If you had to, build a house without access to YouTube, right? If you had to just from scratch, without any manuals or anything else, build a house, and someone said, "Well, why don't you make it out of brick?" Your first problem would be, "I don't know how to make bricks," right? There's a funny routine by, you guys have heard of Nate Bargatze, you know who he is, you've seen his videos, I'm sure, where he talks about if he were sent back in time, he would be useless because if they asked him about his cell phone, he would have no idea how it works. He had no idea how any of the things that he uses, the technology that he uses, he would not be able to help explain anything or offer anything to people in the past because he doesn't understand. But we're all like that. I don't know how to make bricks. I have no idea. But they understood. They knew, they had developed this technology. So they're going to burn them thoroughly. And it says, and they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." So, I think the lesson that we ought to learn from the Tower of Babel is not that technology is bad, but technology in the pursuit of making a name for ourselves is bad. The original purpose of the creation mandate was for Adam and Eve and their descendants to reflect the glory of God, to be image bearers, reflecting His glory to the rest of creation as they spread out over the earth. But these people in Babel, rather than reflect the glory of God, want to make a name for themselves. And that's how we can test our use of technology. Am I using this technology purely to promote my own self-interest, or am I trying to use it in such a way that I bring honor and glory to God? That's the key question. And those are the kinds of questions that we're going to ask as we look at different areas of technology over the next few weeks. So I've got 4 areas that I want us to think about, okay? And again, for the most part, these do focus upon modern technology, computers, our use of those. It's not completely, but so we have a broad definition of technology, but I am focusing a little bit more narrowly in the coming weeks on our application. So what I want to do is I'm going to give you a preview for each one of these of what I plan to talk about, because I want you to come over the next few weeks with some specific questions about these different areas. They may be practical questions, they may be biblical or theological questions, but I want you to come ready with some questions related to each one of these each week, all right? So next week, the topic will be controlling ourselves and our devices. So devices is broad-ranging, but it's your phone, your tablet, your computer, your television, all right? All of the things that you use to access the broader world and interact with the broader world outside of your own home. And we all know, we've already mentioned a few times, we all know that these devices give us access to things that we ought not to have access to. They allow us to entertain or be entertained by things that are sinful and displeasing to God. And while the ultimate answer to dealing with those things is controlling ourselves, that's important. Self-control matters, and we'll talk about that. We also need to know and understand how to control what our devices have access to. And so we're going to actually talk very practically about how to put parental controls on all of your devices. Okay, that may not sound like the most interesting topic in the world, but if you have kids, or even if you don't have kids, every device that we have in our homes should have, I know they're called parental controls, but they're just content controls. They should have content controls on them. And so we're going to talk about why we should do that, but we're also going to talk about actually how to do it with some of the most common devices, all right? And then the week after that, we're going to look towards social media. And we're going to consider the negative impacts of social media, mainly how it can be an incredible distraction for us from the things in life that we ought to be participating in. But also, on the positive side, how the mission that Christ has given to His church can actually be pursued through social media. So I'm not coming at any of these topics with a purely negative attitude. I'm trying with each one of them to think about the positive side and the negative side. And on some of these, you may conclude, well, I don't see how I can pursue that positive aspect, so I want to stay away from it altogether, and that's perfectly fine. But others may think, well, I feel the Lord is calling me to use this in a positive way, so we need to make sure we know how to test ourselves, to check ourselves, to see that we are using technology in a positive way for the glory of God. So we're going to talk about social media, the distraction that it can be, but also the mission that we can accomplish and the furtherance of the mission that we can pursue through social media. And then in the following week, so 3 weeks from tonight, we're going to turn to AI, because that's the big topic that's going on today. And what I mainly want to focus upon is the contrast between artificial intelligence and the wisdom of God. Because I feel like there's a growing tendency, particularly among young people, but there is a growing tendency to rely upon AI for what we would normally go to the Lord for in prayer. things that we would normally go to other Christians and ask their advice on, now all of a sudden we're asking ChatGPT or Claude or some other AI for answers to these things. And I want us to learn the proper use of AI, but also I want us to be very aware of how AI can quickly displace real wisdom that comes from the Lord. So we're going to talk about that. And then the last thing we're going to talk about, we're going to come back to where we started tonight. We're going to come back to the dominion mandate, to the creation mandate, and we're going to talk about the balance between our responsibility to exercise dominion over the earth and the right that that confers on us to make use of the resources around us in the natural world, balancing that with the need to take care of the creation and conserve the creation. Because oftentimes avoiding the bad and pursuing the good is about figuring out the right balance. When we become unbalanced in one direction or the other, we'll find ourselves pursuing the bad. And it may be the bad toward the left or to the right. That doesn't matter. But if we're unbalanced in our approach to some of these issues, then we'll no longer be carrying out the dominion that we're given for the glory of God, but for some other purpose. So these are the 4 things that I have in mind to talk about. If there are other aspects to technology and how it impacts the Christian life that you guys want to add into this list, I'm happy to try to incorporate those. Okay? Is there anything that you feel already, you're like, oh, how did he leave that off, that you want to add in there and talk about? Feel okay with this list? Okay. All right, well, that's where we're going to be headed. I know that I'm finishing up really early tonight because I just wanted tonight to be an introduction and to kind of let you know what we're going to be doing over the next several weeks. So, any questions or comments or thoughts over this study as we move forward? No? Okay. Well, it's a rare thing that we finished early. All right. Anybody want to close us in prayer? All right, Colt.